Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another installment of Meet the Chief. We are very, very fortunate to have Chief Master Sergeant retired Kathy Cooper join us from Missouri. And she's going to tell us all about her career, and she has some very sound advice for young airmen progressing through their career. And I'd like to just kick things off with having you tell us a little bit about where you grew up and your path to the Air Force.
Okay. Well, hi, John. Thank you so much for having me. And it's an honor to be here and to share my story with you and my career and the things that I've gotten to do and enjoy throughout my 27-year career. I'm originally from Springfield, Missouri, and that's where I'm living now. I started playing flute when I was in the fifth grade in Republic, Missouri. And I kind of always knew that music was my thing. It was kind of my refuge. And we lived out in a little farm out in the country, and that was kind of my thing that I enjoyed doing to keep me occupied. And again, it was just kind of a refuge for me. So I grew up with that, and then I attended school here in Springfield. It was then Southwest Missouri State University. It's now Missouri State University, and I was a music major there. Graduated, and then I became a teacher in a little town called Greenfield, Missouri. Uh, so I did that for really almost a year. I had a bit of a problem at that point in time in my life. I fell into a deep depression and ended up in the hospital. I was in a psychiatric unit for about 6 weeks, and they did not think I was going to survive. But I had a very good counselor that continued to work with me, believed in me, and helped me through that. And I did survive. But when I came out, I was really starting life all over again. I kind of started at rock bottom, and in my sessions with him, he asked me, what I wanted to do, and of course, I'd always really wanted to be a performer, and so he encouraged me to audition for the Air Force Band. I had known a clarinet player at the time in our university who was a grad assistant who played in the Air Force Band. So I contacted people up at the Scott Air Band at the time, and they said they were going to be in town in 3 weeks and asked me if I wanted to audition. So I said, of course I will. So as I began to prepare again and get my skills back up, my counselor, whose name was Bob, he said, "Oh, Kathy, whatever you do in your life, you've got to do something with music because have just changed incredibly since you've picked up your flute again." And so I auditioned, passed the audition, but they called and said, you passed the audition, but we don't have a spot for you right now. And I said, okay. So the next day they called me and said, well, we've created a position for you at Wright-Patterson. And if you want the position, then you need to let us know by noon tomorrow. And I thought, oh, I've got to decide the next 4 years of my life by noon tomorrow. And so I thought, well, okay, I'm going to do it. And I did have a little bit of trouble getting into passing MEPS and getting into it because of the depression. But once I got in, went to basic training, and that just kind of led into another whole story, but it started me on my path to where I'm at today.
Tell us a little bit about BMT, because I know that was a personal experience for you and journey. And I think another chief that we'll be interviewing soon, Chief Barb Miller, was with you at BMT. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, Barb Miller and I were both in the same flight, and we were in the same Drum and Bugle Corps flight there. And there's a picture of us both there together and playing there. And but BMT was a little difficult for me because the last day that I saw my counselor before I left for BMT was that day that I left for BMT. And so when I arrived, they wanted to really put me through the ringer to test me to see what my mental and emotional stamina was. And so they kept pulling me off and putting me into groups and seeing this person and seeing a psychologist. And I kept saying, but all I want to do is go train with my flight. So every time I was taken out to do something, the flight was training. And so that put me a day behind the flight. So the entire time I was there, I kept having to play catch up. And so that was very difficult. And there was another girl there that was really struggling, and she was really kind of suicidal. And so they put me alongside with her to go with her everywhere. And so not only was I trying to get through, but I was having to get her through it also. So it was really difficult. But I was determined, and I finally said, look, this is what I want to do. I'm good to go. And they finally released me and said, okay, you're good to go. And so I played catch up, got caught up with my flight, and then so I went on from there. But yeah, Bar Miller and I were in there together, and there was a very interesting story that I have to tell about Bar Miller, and she can tell her side of the story too. But we had gone out somewhere on town on leave, and we had come back in, and so we were down in the orderly room, and they were yelling at us for whatever reason. So we were standing there, at attention, and we were against the wall. Well, there was this frame right behind me that I kind of swayed a little bit and hit the frame, and the frame came crashing down. And immediately you hear the taps, of the TIs coming over. Well, he starts yelling at poor Barb, and he is just screaming at her, and she's like, I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything. And so I was terrified, and I spoke up and I said, oh, it was me. So he finally let her go, and then he, proceeded to yell at me, and but it was a story that we've told for many years. So
Yeah, it's amazing how some things just stick with you, right?
absolutely. But we've gone through our career together, and she has been a great friend, and also a great chief, somebody that I really admire. And I know that you'll have a great interview with her also.
Absolutely. Well, walk us through. So following BMT, and you like you said, you had some difficult challenges, but you sound like you knew what you wanted to do. You really were so passionate about your new career in performance, and hopefully that was something that helped lead you through. And now that you're out of BMT, your first assignment was Wright-Patterson.
Yes. Yeah. Wright-Patterson was my first band, and I got up there, and another former chief, Regina Bruner, and she was my roommate. I don't know if she was a staff sergeant or tech sergeant at the time, clarinet player, but I had a lot of respect for her, and she really helped me out a lot in getting into and getting settled in the band and everything. Our first tour was to New York, and we did a flight over Niagara Falls in a C-130, which was really cool. I remember it was just the band on the plane, and back then they let us go up in the cockpit a little bit, and there were windows. Well, we had two pregnant ladies on the plane, and at that time we could still fly over Niagara Falls. And so the pilot dropped down really low, and he just circled and let us get some good pictures. And Colonel Shelton was our commander at the time, and he sat there and he's like, yeah, turn this baby upside down. We're like, no, it's a C-130. No, you can't turn this baby upside down. But we were all excited, and the poor two ladies in the back that were pregnant, they were just having a hard time. But it was a great time. And I do remember when we started doing renovations on the building there at Wright-Patterson, and connecting a lot of those buildings together. I have a lot of pictures from those times, and a lot of great memories from that. I did a lot of playing in the woodwind quintet there. that was at a time that we actually named that quintet the Huffman Prairie Winds, and I believe that was Lisa Williams, now Sayer, and I think she came up with that name. And but we had a great time, really good people with that quintet. We did a lot of playing, especially in the general's house, the Four Stars house. We did a lot of work there, and that was always very interesting because we entertained a lot of foreign dignitaries at the time, and we would always, play some music, and then at the end of the evening, they always had us come in and play a little short 15-minute concert in the living room, and so we got to do a lot of interaction there, and that was some good stories. We had one general who was a former clarinet player, and so he loved having the quintet over. And the thing was, though, was that he would always just kind of work his way over to where we were, and he would stand right over the shoulder of the clarinet player, who was Laura Nagel, now Laura Green, and he would just hover over her and watch her music and listen to her play. And he really enjoyed it. He loved it. Of course, that made her a little nervous, but he loved playing. He loved for us to play the Pachelbel canon, and so we continued to play it. And then he finally told us one time. I told the group, I said, we don't want to overdo this. Let's not play it. And so he came up to me one day and he said, Sergeant Cooper, I want you to play that piece, and I don't want you to stop until I tell you to stop. Okay. I was like, yes, sir. So we played it every single time. And so when he left, we got the clarinet part to the Pachelbel canon, and we framed it and we all signed it and presented it to him. And we heard from his aide that that was the most special gift. It went in the front seat of his car, and it was the first thing that went up in his new house. And but it was really good. It was really good to interact with a lot of the foreign dignitaries there and to play a part in that. So
I was speaking with Colonel Graham in a prior interview, and he was making a point of there's so many, high-ranking officials like generals that have at least some sort of musical background, and it's pretty incredible.
oh yeah.
And I don't know if you were there. I think General Babbitt was a four-star that was a drummer for the Ventures, and the list goes on. I think that's it's really great that we have a special place, I think, in many of their hearts.
Yeah.
Was this the same gentleman that I think you guys were maybe had an assignment to make some stars in the grass? There's a story behind the stars in the grass.
Yes. I don't think it was the same general. It was a different general. But the story on that is one of my themes is, and you'll kind of see this in different stories that I tell, is that you just always do what has to be done to get the job done. You just do whatever it takes. So we had an incident when the general was going to be coming to visit our unit. And so it was Colonel Shelton at the time was the commander. And he had asked for some volunteers just to come out and kind of help tidy up the unit. And, we were going to be mowing some grass and, picking up cigarette butts and tidying the place up a bit, And so there were several of us that showed up, and he gave us some instructions on, what needed to be done. Well, he needed to go tend to some business. And so he left for a little while. So this same Regina Bruner, who, now chief, retired. Again, I think she was a staff or a tech at the time. So we sat there, and if you've been to Wright-Patterson, there's kind of a hill there that you can kind of see as you're coming in, the far back gate. And so it was all grass. And she sat there for a minute and she said, the general's coming. I think we should mow a star in the grass. We're like, oh yeah, that'd be a great idea. So we got some rocks and we made points and we, mowed a star in the grass. And she said, well, he's a 4-star. I guess maybe we should mow 4-stars in the grass. So we said, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So we all got together and we mowed the 4-stars in the grass. And so we sat back and looked at it, but then it was like, well, you can't really see it very well. So, well, let's drop the blade on the mower a little lower and mow the grass a little shorter. So we mowed all 4-stars a little shorter, and so then we were pretty happy with it. It was like, okay, you can't see it really well, but you can see it enough. Well, the next day when we came back, the sun had come out and burned the grass, and it was brown. And so there were 4 brown stars that you could see, long before you even got to the gate, that you could see. So Colonel Shelton came back and he said, well, it's either going to love it or we're all going to get fired. And of course, the general got there and he got word of it, and he loved it. And he even sent somebody down from public affairs to take a picture of it. And so it kind of became a lasting memory. But it was a good sign of teamwork and getting the job done.
I'm glad he saw it lighthearted and not as an omen.
Yes. He loved it. He loved it. It was great.
One thing I wanted to point out, and you're kind enough to send me a little bit of a snapshot of your career, and sounds like the Huffman Prairie Winds were quite the achievers. So I think you at one point they were named the Levitaw Quintet. And for those that maybe aren't familiar with Levitaw, maybe tell us a little bit about how that name came to be.
Yes, John Levitow was the youngest airman to ever receive the Medal of Honor. And so when you went to leadership school, the highest award in the school was the John Levitow Award. And so there were 4 of us out of the 5 in the quintet that had already received the Levitow Award. And there was one other person who had yet to go to school, and that was Brian Ledoux. And so you can imagine the pressure that he felt. But he did go to leadership school, and he also received the Levitow Award. So we kind of became known as the Levitow Quintet.
That's awesome. That was another Grahamism, as you said, music equals smart, smarts equals influence. So
Yes, exactly.
well, so I know I want to make sure we kind of talk about there. You had some difficult circumstances that came up during Right Pat, but another instance of where you overcame those. But maybe tell that story as something that can be helpful to people listening to this interview that may go through things during their career.
Well, it was when I first got in. Of course, I had just come out of basic training, and I was still learning to utilize the tools that I had learned with my counselor. So I did face ups and downs dealing with my depression, but I had to be off of the medication, of course, to even come into basic training, and I was doing fine. But like I said, I would still have ups and downs, but I I did use the tools that I learned to deal with this, because it wasn't just depression; it was panic attacks. And if anybody's ever really experienced panic attacks for no reason. We all deal with panic and depression, but for no reason, where it comes out of the blue and you're kind of freaking out and you don't know why. It can be a very terrifying ordeal. So I did learn how to control those for a little, to manage it. But it was really throughout my whole career that I did have to learn how to handle that. And it wasn't until I got to Hanscom. From Wright Patterson, I went to Germany, and then I went to Hanscom after that. And a few years after I had been at Hanscom, I really reached a point where I realized that I was feeling the depression so terribly again that it was just almost unbearable. And I couldn't figure out why, even when I would do the things that I enjoyed the most, why I would feel like I was walking around with a black cloud hanging over my head. I just didn't know. But I really reached a point where it was like, I can't do this anymore. And I finally decided I didn't care if the Air Force kicked me out. I couldn't live like that anymore. So I went to the doctor and said, hey, you know, here's what's going on. And I think I need to get back on medication. And so he sent me to a VA counselor, and they asked me, what was going on in my life. And I said, everything's great. I've got a great job. I love what I do. I have great friends. I have a great church. I love my job. Everything is great in my life. I'm just depressed all the time. I have this black cloud hanging over my head, and I cry for no reason. I don't understand it, and it was just very difficult to do my job. And I was like, I just couldn't live like that anymore. And she said, well, we're about 95% sure that you have a true chemical imbalance, and you're probably going to be on medication the rest of your life. So I said, okay. So they put me back on medication, and it took about 3 months and for it to finally kick in. But then all of a sudden one day, I started realizing, hey, I'm happy, and is this what normal people feel like? you know, um, and so I've been on medication to this day. And but through that experience, I had a lot of people that found out about it, and they would kind of secretly come to me and say, hey, I heard that you're on medication, or you're struggling with this, and they didn't kick you out. And I said no. And I was able to encourage a lot of other people that were also struggling with that depression and just difficulties in going to get help. And not all of them had to get on medication. Some of them did for a little while, some of them didn't. um, but the thing is that they felt encouraged to go get help, realizing that the Air Force wasn't just going to kick them out, and that there was somebody else that was going through this and understood what they were feeling. And they were surviving. I was a survivor. I was overcoming it, and they could see that, and that gave them encouragement to go seek help for themselves.
I think that's a great point of myth busting a little bit that, I know personally I've gone through some things, and, I was on, for me, medication for a little while, and that helped me kind of get through some stuff. And, I think the more we tell those stories, I think, like I said, it encourages people to not be afraid, be less hesitant to go get the help you need. Honestly, it's like you said, you came to the point where you value your health and wellness no matter what. But then it turned out, as you said, they didn't just kick you out, which can be a myth that people buy into. And so encouraging people to talk openly about it, so the people that may be struggling in private don't have to and can go use those resources for however long they need it.
And it's not even so much as whether or not the Air Force, would kick you out, although that is definitely a concern, the stigma of it. Um, but I have personally known, I think I've counted 7 people that have committed suicide. And one of those was a general. And, so this disease is no respecter of rank. It can hit anybody and every person, regardless of rank, from uh, slick sleeve to 4-star general. We're all human beings, and we all have things that we have to deal with. And so my message is that there is always an answer to whatever is hurting you, and the answer is not suicide. It is not suicide. My doctors told me that I was suicidal. They did not expect me to live when I was in the hospital. They They said I would never survive in the Air Force. They didn't even think I would make it out of the hospital. But proved them wrong. And there's always an answer. There's always an answer. My counselor Bob did tell me a long time ago. Back when I was at Wright-Patterson, I was up for Airman of the Year, and I told him about it, and he said, Kathy, he said, seeing where you were sitting in that room staring at the wall for 3 days, and then a doctor saying that you weren't going to survive, to winning a yearly award like this is nothing short of a miracle. And you really need to tell your story. You really should write a book someday. And when I did, when I got to Alaska, that's the book right there. I had a writer at my church, and got with him, and he helped me publish the book, publish my story. And so then when I PCS to Scott Air Force Base, the command chief at the time heard my story, found out about this. So he started taking me around to various organizations and telling my story. And the thing that I noticed was that everywhere I went, invariably at the end, someone would very quietly pull me aside, and they would say, I'm so glad you told that story, because I thought I was the only one that felt that way. Every single time somebody pulled me aside to tell me they were struggling too, and they thought they were the only one, and they're not. They're not. And I even had one lady that um, I spoke at a leadership school, and 3 months later, I was sitting at my desk just going through emails, and an email popped up and said, Chief, I can't stop thinking about you. I'm at the end of my rope. I don't know what to do. I can't go on. Can we talk? I'm like, sure. What are you doing right now? So I went and met with her and talked with her, and I got this all the time, that it was amazing to me how many people are struggling out there, but everybody's afraid to say something. I was afraid to say something. But the thing is that we don't need to be afraid to say something. It's okay to need help. It doesn't mean that you're not okay. You are okay. You just need help. We all need help. We all need help in dealing with things, especially in the day and age that we live right now. It's a lot of stress, very stressful, and it's okay to need help with that. And so that's what I do. I try to do is to use my book as a tool to kind of help get my story out there, because if those people will tell their story, and those people will tell their stories, then the stigma will decrease, and we'll begin to see that, we're all in the same boat. We're all struggling, and we all need each other. We all need each other to help. And there are ways of getting answers and getting the help that you need, so that we don't lose another person to suicide.
And I imagine it was just immensely rewarding to know the impact you were having. Like you said, you're getting messages all the time, and that specific one of the email to you, being able to get with them before it's too late, and
Yes.
hopefully make the difference, or a difference, to get them in the right direction.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, going back to, just rewinding back to your career progression. So after Wright-Patterson, I believe you went to Germany. Is that correct?
Yes. To Einsiedler-Hof. Mm-hmm.
How was that experience?
Oh my goodness. It was awesome. It was awesome. I was there 4 years, and I think in the first 6 months that I was there, I was not home longer than 3 weeks at a time. We traveled immensely. We covered a great deal of territory. We were gone TDY all the time. I loved every minute of it. Um, Got to see a lot of things, experience a lot of things, and it was one of the best assignments that I had.
Now, I know for a lot of people, first of all, I've never heard anybody say they hated going to Germany. So that's one thing. But I've also heard that most people say that they really, if they didn't understand the mission before, that's when they really get it, when you are representing the United States and the United States military to so many other countries. And I know you had a great story about a very specific tour, a Russian tour. And being a flute player, you're certainly not foreign to the Stars and Stripes Forever. So maybe indulge our audience a little bit about that story and what it meant to you that particular moment.
Well, there were a couple of stories in that. We did tour with the Russian Red Army Band. We did 2 tours with them. One year we were in England, and the second year we did in Russia. And so the first time when we were in England, we got to know our counterparts. And I got to tell you, the Russian flute player, well, all of these musicians were just incredible musicians. Um, I was amazed at their skill. But we had 2 flutists there, and we became good friends with them. And we got into the tradition of kind of exchanging gifts, and we would always try to one up the other one, you know. And so we had and we finally asked them, and in our best Russian and their best English, which was not much between the 2 of us, if there was something that they would like to have that we could get for them. And because they had a hard time getting things. And one of them said that he would like to have a Barbie doll to give his daughter. She had never had one, and they were quite expensive for them to get. A Barbie doll for them would cost them about a month's wages. And so he was never able to get his daughter a Barbie doll. So we went down to the local toy store and bought a couple of Barbie dolls and came back and presented them to him. And here was this Russian soldier, you know, just in tears, because he was finally going to be able to give this doll to his daughter, something that he had never been able to do before. And likewise, in turn, I think they won the gift exchange, because in the very end, the last gift that they gave to me was an entire Russian uniform, and which I still have, and that was very special to me. Um, One of the guys was the piccolo player, and of course, you know, being the flutist, we do Stars and Stripes Forever and Ever. You can wake us up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you know we can play it from a dead sleep. But we did this one concert, and we were in the Royal Albert Hall, and it was one of my fondest memories. Um, the time, you know, we were all on loading crew, so we were all pushing boxes, and it was hot, and we're pushing things in, and all of a sudden, I just had to stop and realize where I was. And in the concert, I it hit me again. I just kind of stopped and did a take of everything, and I was like, I'm sitting here in Royal Albert Hall. I'm surrounded on either side by Russian musicians. We have a Russian conductor playing 1812 Overture. It was just the most incredible experience. I just couldn't believe where I was, and it was just beautiful. And the when we got to the Stars and Stripes, we would always the other Russian player and I, we would always go up front, and we would swap hats, and uh, and then you know do the Stars and Stripes Forever. So it was really a sign at the time of the relationship building between you know the 2 countries, again through music, which again is our whole purpose, is to make a difference through music. That's what we do, is to make a difference through music. And another incident that I had when I was there, this was when we were playing in, I believe it was in Dresden. It wasn't Dresden, but we were in an opera house, and it held like 3,000 people. And I got up to do Stars and Stripes. And again, you know, you do this every concert. It just, you know, it's like, okay, do it again. But at that time, I was so nervous because I felt the weight at that moment. I felt like I'm the American. Let's hear how the American piccolo player does this, So in that moment, I felt like I was representing all of America. And that was a very incredible experience for me. And I pulled it off, but that was very moving. That was very moving for me. And when we went to Russia and did the tour with them in Russia, we were told that we would be interviewed after the concert, and we were prepared for that. So at intermission, we you know went backstage, and all of a sudden we were bombarded, and they with questions. They just started asking us all these questions. They were very curious about the women in our band because they wanted to know what it was like to be a woman in the military. They wanted to know how the men treated us. They wanted to know, what our husbands thought of us being in the military. It was just a very foreign concept to them at the time, and they were very curious about women being in the military. So there again, it was another great opportunity to represent America to another country.
Absolutely. And like you said, it's amazing the kind of transformative power you can see in music with those relationships, and it can really soften some hearts and open up some conversations, such as that. The successes and progress we've made in simple things like having women in the military and taking on those roles that not that long ago were not the case, and be inspiration to them that this is a thing in America. This is a thing in America, and how we got there.
Right, right.
Following your time in Germany, your next stop was Hanscom, and that was a particularly challenging time, being in the wake of 9/11. And so maybe you can tell us a little bit about that experience.
Mm-hmm.
Coming back stateside, and what was the kind of the timeline of that event? Were you already at Hanscom when it happened, or were you still in Germany?
Yeah, I arrived in Hanscom in '97, so I was already there. And at the time, we were preparing for a tour and also for a recording session. Major Scott was the commander at the time, and so we were just in rehearsals and working for the recording session. And then we had one of our vocalists come in and interrupt the rehearsal and told us about the plane that had hit the World Trade Center. And so we kind of stopped and we went in and saw it on the news. And like everybody else, we're thinking, what was this guy thinking? And then we went back to rehearsing, and pretty soon the vocalist came back in again and said, the second tower has been hit. And that's when we knew that, we were under attack. The base immediately went to Delta. And I remember thinking all of these times that we had done drills and base drills, and I've always thought, I'll never see Delta, on our soil. And here we were in Delta, and everything became very eerie. It was very eerily quiet because all the planes, of course, had been grounded. There was not a plane in the sky. There was no noise. It was just very, very quiet. And we sat and watched the news as everything unfolded. Obviously, lots of emotions. We finally it was lifted enough that we were able to go home. And then in the wake of all of that, we came back. And as we walked into the rehearsal hall, it was kind of like it felt like a museum with everything was exactly the way it was before, but our world had changed. It was very different it was just very different. We ended up scrapping our whole repertoire for that tour, and we redid a different program. We played Hymn to the Fallen in that, and showed did a video along with that with President Bush, and some things, and just a lot of video coverage through that. I remember everywhere we went after that, all I remember seeing is just tons of flags everywhere we went, flags everywhere. The concert halls were just filled with flags. And when we got to that piece, Hymn to the Fallen, you know how as a musician you're playing and you're focused on the music, and then you have a little brief spot where you've got rests, and so you kind of glance up at the video screen, and that period of time was right when President Bush was speaking. And every time, it was all I could do to hold back the tears, just because of the emotion that you could feel in the room. But you could just feel the healing happening in the audience as we played. And people would come up afterwards and talk, about their experiences, and people would sing. You would see auditoriums with every person on their feet just singing patriotic songs. And it was so moving and so powerful. And you could just see the power of music that had in the healing of our country at that time. It was just a very, very moving time, very difficult time in our nation's country, in our nation's time, at that time.
Yeah, it was great that you guys were able to offer a chance to rebuild emotionally, and those, bring those communities together through the military music. Well, so after Hanscom, you got a chance to go to Alaska. Was your next assignment?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit. I didn't know that. So you guys did something with the Qatari musicians. So
Yes.
I think from what I understand, that Alaska actually had a pretty far-reaching AOR at the time.
That was at a time when there was a lot of restructuring with the bands. And so Alaska and PACAF then included Alaska, Hawaii, and Japan. And the band in Japan had been cut down from the concert band to just the smaller ensemble. And so Alaska band ended up covering a lot of the Asia territory. And so we did go to a lot of different places there. We went to Malaysia, we went to Indonesia, we went to South Korea, a lot of places like that. And then we also deployed at that time. Some of the key things that we did there in those trips, one of them was with the Malaysia Air Force Band. We did a joint concert with them. And that was a very interesting experience, because we arrived there and we were supposed to do a week-long tour, joint concerts with them. And when we arrived, you could tell they kind of lined the back wall and they're kind of looking at us like, we're not sure what to think about you. And so it was, you could just really feel the distance between us. And as we got together and played together, you could see the bonding happening between the two groups. We were just all musicians. We were people. And by the end of the week, it was just amazing how, everybody was, was just one. And how we would always exchange accoutrements from our uniforms, and they were like, when can we come to Alaska? And they just really wanted to come to the States. But we really created a bond there. And there's one picture that I think just tells the story. Rick Baisden just such an incredible musician, and I just love to not only hear him play, but I love to watch him play, because you can see it in his face and in his body language and in his emotions. And there's a picture, I believe, that I sent you with him playing with one of the other musicians there, and you could just see the two of them interacting. You know, they're just one. They're just interacting, and it's just incredible to see that. And at the end of the week, the ambassador actually brought us up to his office, and he of course thanked us and everything for, you know, the work that we did, but he said, you can't imagine the barriers that you broke down this week. uh, he said, you know, we put a light on America, at such a positive light on Americans, that it was like, oh, you Americans are not as bad as what we think you were. You know, it was just a very positive light, and they could see that, you know, we're people just like them. And but the ambassador said that we had really broken down a lot of barriers, and that opened up a lot of doors, so now the politicians could come in and do what they do. And so there again, music made a difference. The power of music to open those doors to allow the other leaders to go in and do what they do. And so that was a very awesome experience there. We also had an opportunity in Indonesia where we played in a leprosy village. And preface this with, they were not contagious. We went into the place where they were no longer contagious, but they were put into this village. They lived in this village because of the leprosy and because of, you know, the stigma attached to that disease, even though they were no longer contagious. And these people had never seen an American. Many of them had never seen American a band. They've never seen musical instruments. They'd never seen anything like this. And the administrators there encouraged us just to interact with the people there, because of the stigma of the leprosy, nobody would ever touch them. And I had one woman that was holding her child and brought her up to me and wanted me just to, you know, touch her on the shoulder, just to touch her, just so that she could feel the touch of another human being, because she doesn't get that. And so we played, and we could, you know, you could just see everybody just enjoying the music. You could just see them dancing and engaging in the music. And when we got done, one of our drummers, he went over, and the kids just surrounded him, and he's high-fiving them all, you know. And it was just so good to see that interaction. And they were just so grateful just to have that touch, you know, of another human being. And again, just another way that music makes a difference, and not only just makes a difference, but there again, it puts a positive light on Americans, and, you know, what we really stand for.
I was glad to hear the story about Malaysia. From my understanding, you know, for example, is a very high Muslim population, and I can imagine in the aftermath of 9/11, and with a lot of cross currents, and, you know, people feeling very emotional, that the band, the music could bring them at ease and unite and let them know that, you know, America as a whole and most Americans are very receptive and understanding, and that, you know, that you could come together in such a beautiful way, especially in the midst of just a very crazy time in the world. And we seem to be in a crazy time now, and then crazy, you know, so it's very important to see that soft power of music to be able to condition the hearts, and, like you said, then enable those discussions to come forth from the politicians. So one thing I've heard is military bands often are the tip of the spear, or the soft power that can, you know, put people at ease, and prevent any need for violence or acceleration of that type of stuff. and
Yeah.
can just let people talk, let people realize at the core, we're all human,
Yes.
no
And
matter what background.
another example of that too was when we did deploy, because when I was in Alaska, we did deploy there, and we did this one gig that we were supposed to do a joint concert with Qatari musicians you mentioned earlier, and I had three of my guys there, incredible musicians, and I tell you what, they really they made this happen because there was no repertoire, and their musical instruments were not the same as our musical instruments, not pitched together, not nothing, and we're like, well, how are we gonna make this happen, how do we do this? um, I was so proud of my guys because they pulled their heads together and they said, okay, let's do this. They through interpreters, they talked with the other musicians, the guitar musicians, and said, can you do this? Can you, what about some chord progressions? Can you do this? And they made it happen. They made it happen. And again, it just goes to show the level, the skill level, for one, of our musicians, the intelligence, the tenacity to get the job done. You do what you have to do, and they made it happen. And I tell you, I was so proud of them at that time, to see what they were able to accomplish. So that was really powerful.
And was that at the time, were you functioning as a director of operations?
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
For
Yeah.
those that don't know, that could
Went
be,
over as the DO, and we had our rock band, and that went over, and so
I was going to say, for those that don't know, director of operations, I haven't had that role yet, but I know it's a lot. There's a lot to it, making sure that people are in the right place at the right time. It can be much more difficult than you might anticipate. And like you said, things like, hey, we don't even, we don't even normally play in the same tuning system with the right instruments, or with the same instruments. So being able to overcome those.
yeah, we
Now,
had three bands over there at the time, and because they would always overlap. And so as a director of operations, it was my job to schedule their tours, in all of these Middle Eastern countries, which, half of them I I didn't know anything about. So it was a very educational experience for me, to learn about all of that too. But again, they made it happen, and it was very powerful. And they're still making it happen. I still see on Facebook all the time our absent musicians over there doing a great job, and I'm always impressed to see that the level that they've taken it to. Everything is reaching a higher level, and they're doing an even greater job. And so very proud of those musicians that they're continuing to do that job over there.
now what at this point, what rank were you? And were you weren't
I was
chief
senior
yet?
master sergeant at the time.
Senior master sergeant, you said?
Hmm.
And so did you make chief in Alaska, or was that when you came
I
to?
made chief in Alaska. Um, I was actually in Hawaii when I got the phone call. um, it was I knew the list was coming out, but we we were at a public affairs event down in Hawaii at the time, and I was getting ready that morning and saw that the phone was ringing, and it was the 907 area code from Alaska, and I thought, oh no, something's happening back home. What's going on, And I got the phone call, and it was the general that had told me that I had made chief, and so that was quite a great way to find out. Great place to find out. So, but yeah, I made chief then, and then I PCS to Scott Air Force Base.
Now tell us about, well, bring us into Scott, but also this new role. Chief's a big deal. Chief's a big deal. It's the top enlisted, and now you are more than ever responsible for people. And I would say you were ready for it, obviously, and especially with your unique background, I think, well equipped to help your people. So tell us a little bit about that journey now, as far as being the band manager at Scott.
Well, that was at a time when things were really changing in the career field. Um, as you know, in for so many years, musicians didn't get to move around much unless you were going overseas. And then when you came back, and so the idea was that we need to career broaden our folks and get people moving around a little bit. And so the Air Force really started enforcing that. Um, I have to give kudos to Chief Aiello because he was our career field manager at the time, and that was just an incredible feat for him to manage all of these changes. Change is difficult for everybody, and these were some massive changes. So we had a lot of people at Scott who had been there for a very long time. So, they were very well connected. As a musician, you play together for that long, you just know each other's playing and it just flows. And now this was all about to change. And so every time we would get somebody PCS, we'd get somebody new in. And you know what that's like, no matter how great all of the players are, you always introduce a new person, and it's a new um, dynamic to the group. Multiply that by about 30 because it seemed like we ended up having almost half of our band turnover, our personnel turnover during that time. Not only that, but with each new person that came in or each new person that left, we had to figure out where to put them in which ensemble, because you may lose a jazz trumpet player and get in more of a classical player, or you may lose your lead trumpet player and you get in somebody who is not the lead trumpet player. Now what do you do? Not only that, but you had to take into consideration administratively what was going on. You may lose your director of operations, and get in somebody else who had no operations experience whatsoever. So you're constantly moving around, and every time somebody would come in and somebody would leave, everything got jumbled. Well, you would just get kind of settled into this, and then you would get another PCS. So it was a very difficult time, musically, administratively, and emotionally for people, just because this had been their home for so long. It it I think in the end, though, I think it really did the career field justice, to make these changes, even though it was difficult at the time, and it took several years for everything to settle down. So I was only at Scott Air Force Base for 3 years, and so this was kind of the whole adjustment period while I was there. So it was it was a bit of a turmoil, my last 3 years there, but we got through it. We got through it.
Yeah, like you said, it's not like there was a pause on all the performances and
Right.
things of that nature to take the time that would be a luxury to be able to put people in the right places and uptick them on the training they need and all that kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
another thing that
Yeah, and the communication factor among the chiefs was really incredible too, because we had a great team of chiefs. We all talked with one another. Communication is so important, and there we could all talk with one another, and we talked with each other probably daily. And so it was the combination of the teamwork and the communication of all of those leaders, all of those managers in every band talking with each other on a daily basis, coordinating through Chief Aiello, talking with our people, um, there had to be a lot of that going on, and we had a wonderful team of chiefs that managed to pull that off.
I was going to mention that, those that may be listening to this interview that aren't familiar in the band, especially as you go further and further along, you do have auxiliary duties, because in many ways we are self-sustaining as a band, functionally. And so, especially, as you sit in a band manager position, having to, coordinate the tentacles, if you will, to make sure that there wasn't one snafu, which can be a delicate thing, to make sure that, people are where they need to be and on the road, and doing the magnificent performances that we're hired to do. And so certainly kudos to you to being able to navigate that challenge, and make sure that we were staying on track, with many cooks in the kitchen and many pots boiling. So
Absolutely.
now I wanted to ask you, did you, I'm sure you did, find some particular points where you found your experiences that you had earlier on battling with depression and anxiety in helping, especially in maybe a particularly anxious time, being able to help people individually to get through that challenging time?
You're asking me what helped?
Yeah, what helped, and maybe kind of, bringing that full circle of the experiences you had, now finding the value in kind of having gone down that path, what you could now offer individuals. And you already had been, but even more so now, sitting as the chief enlisted manager responsible for those below you, being able to really step inside people's lives to help them on an individual basis.
I think in the midst of learning the tools of how to deal with a lot of the depression and the anxiety and the panic attacks and all of this, whether it's chronic or whether it's circumstantial, whatever you may be facing. Um, there's a book that really helped me. It was by Viktor Frankl, and it's called Man's Search for Meaning. And he was a survivor of the Holocaust, and he wrote a book that dealt a lot with how he helped people in the midst of the Holocaust to prevent them from committing suicide. And I thought, what is that? How did he do that? How did he get people to that point? Because in his book he tells about the rule in the camp was that if you see somebody in the act of killing themselves, that you could not stop them or you would be killed. So he realized that the key was to find what would give them hope and get them to that point before they reached that point of suicide. And he started studying people, and he would notice when that person lost hope. And he would start talking to them and helping them to realize what a unique individual they are, and that they are the only person that has whatever it is that they have. For example, one man was a scientist who had made all of these discoveries, and he convinced this gentleman that he had to survive so that he could get his discoveries passed along to the world. Another gentleman had a grandson, and that he didn't know if he'd ever get to see or not, and he talked to the gentleman and got him to realize he needed to stay alive for the sake of his grandson, because his grandson was going to need him, when he got out. But the trick was to find what gave that person hope, because it's when a person loses hope that that's when they start down the road to suicide. So you help them to realize their uniqueness, that only they have what they can give. Nobody else can give what it is that they have, and that they have a purpose and they have a reason for being alive. And it's important that they stay alive, so that they can give to the world their uniqueness, their whatever it is that they've been given, whatever that is. So I think that's how we help people, is we help them to realize themselves what they have, you know, that they have something to offer and only they can offer it. Because if they don't, then it's gone, because they are the only person that can give it. And they're unique in that way. And so you help them to find hope. You help them to find an answer, and you help them to realize that there is always an answer. There is always a solution to whatever it is that they are struggling with. There is an answer out there somewhere. But as long as you're keeping it to yourself and you're hiding it within yourself, and you're not reaching out for help, then that's where it's going to remain. Everybody needs each other. We are human beings created for relationships with one another, and we are here to help one another. And so we have to reach out and let people know. And maybe sometimes you can't. Maybe you're not at that point. People did not know the extent that I was at. Nobody knew that I was suicidal or that I had suicidal thoughts. They didn't realize how bad off I was because I hid it, and I was very good at hiding it, and most people are. Um, that's where we, as friends and neighbors and coworkers and supervisors, have to be on the lookout, and we have to say something, you know, and you can't be afraid to say, hey, um, you're not yourself. Talk to me. What's going on? Sometimes all that person needs is the opening, because they can't articulate it themselves. They need somebody else to come along and open that door for them and say, hey, I noticed you're not yourself. Talk to me. What's going on? And that may be the very door that they need to step through, you know.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I know for myself, even simple things like going in, somebody bring me have a cup of coffee, or
Yeah.
to the dog park, or something that we remind ourselves to find the joy in what we're doing, and more importantly, like you said, find the purpose that we all have unique contributions to
Mhm.
offer.
And when I was in the hospital, a real turning point for me was when they brought in another teacher that was also in that facility. Now, when I was in there, when I was put into the hospital, um, my therapist Bob had called me and said, "You're we tested you and you are so far off the charts that we can't even grade your test. You're suicidal. You need to be in the hospital, Monday morning." My kids were supposed to be going to music contest that Monday, and I said, I can't go. I've got to get my kids to music contest. And he told me, he said, you can either go in on your own, in which case you can leave whenever you want to, or I will put you there and you can leave when I tell you you can leave. But either way, you're going in the hospital. So it took me at least 3 days of staring at the wall to just even get over the guilt that I had failed my students, that I couldn't take them to music contest. And I did. I felt like a complete failure. And I thought that there was no way out of this. Well, they brought in another lady to talk with me, and she was a teacher. And I thought, oh, she's going home, and she's in the same boat that I'm in. And I realized there was something that clicked with me right then and there, that if she could go home, if she could get better and go home, if she's in the same boat that I'm in, then I could too. And that's when I realized that when you realize that you're not alone in this, that there's a lot of other people that are feeling the same way that you are and are ready and willing to help. You don't feel so alone anymore. And that's why I tell my story, because I want people to know you're not alone. You're not alone in this, and you don't have to go it alone.
Yeah.
And when more and more people will be open about that and realize, I mean, I could tell you so many stories where it changed somebody's life just to realize that they were not the only one that felt that way. It makes a huge difference. So we need to speak up. We need to speak out. We need to keep an eye on each other.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
Well, I wanted to, as we kind of come towards the end of the interview, I wanted to make sure I caught a couple questions for you. And you had such a wonderful long career. It's probably hard to pick out a couple of these, but one would be a most memorable performance. Maybe you've already mentioned it, or you had another one. And then the other thing would be a particularly funny story. We had the EMT story with Barb Miller, and I'm sure there were many more. I know of one was with some former right pat trumpet players, and they mentioned that I think one of the band members had a new baby, and you held the baby and brought the baby on the bus for a moment. And the baby decided to.
Oh, many, many stories, many, many stories. Humor is what keeps us going, right? Well, yeah, I do have to say my favorite, you know, performance. Well, I've mentioned a couple of those. The one in Royal Albert Hall, and just so many of those. There's just so many experiences that I just felt so blessed and so honored to be doing what I was doing that I had to just stop for a moment and take it in. Um, I do have another funny story that I'll tell. Um, and those who know this story, as soon as I mentioned it, will know exactly what I'm talking about. But it's the Cooper story. And this has to do with former Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, Bob Gaylor. And if you've ever listened to him speak, he's an incredible speaker. And I've heard him many times. And the last few times I started listening to him, I wanted to study him because he amazed me how he got up to just talk. And before you knew it, he was already into his speech. And you're thinking, how did he get there? His transitions were so smooth that he just started talking. And he just had a way of captivating his audience, and that you didn't even realize that he was giving his speech. And so it was at Hanscom. And once again, I had been up for an award, and it was the Electronic Systems Center Senior NCO of the Year. And so they had been taking us around all week. And so people knew, we knew each other. And so they knew my last name. So Chief Gaylor gets up and he begins to tell this story. And it's about an airman that he had, whose last name was Cooper. And he said, bless his heart, this airman, he had a heart of gold, but he could do nothing right. Everything he touched just was a disaster. And he would always say, Cooper, 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 I like you, but you're just not a good airman. And so he would put him onto something else and he would mess that up. Cooper, Cooper, Cooper. Well, by this time, everybody in the audience is laughing hilariously because of me. And of course, he does not know, what is going on. And so he continues with the story, and so he finally says that his unit's going out for some field training, and the commander tells him, "Hey, you're taking Cooper along with you," and he's like, "Oh no, what am I going to do with Cooper? He messes everything up. Everything he touches is a disaster." So he says, I know what I will do. I will have him help the cook. Surely he can help the cook and not create havoc. So he puts him over there. Well, all of a sudden he hears this screaming, and he runs over to find out what happened. Cooper had reached into the oven to pull something out with both hands and had burned both of his hands. And so it just blisters, and I mean, it was just awful. Cooper, Cooper, Cooper. Well, I like you, but you're just not a good airman. So he got his hands all bandaged up, and they look like big old Q-tips. And so he's sitting there. He said, "Go over there and sit down, and we're going to get you taken back to the medical facility. So just sit there for a minute." So he sits there, and then finally Cooper comes over and says, "Chief," and he says, "What is it, Cooper?" And he's sitting here like this, and he says, "I have to go to the bathroom." And Chief Cooper was shaking his head, and he's like, "What am I going to do?" So his whole point was, as a senior leader, you do what you have to do to get the job done. And so that's what he did. And so anyway, needless to say, I got the stigma of the Cooper. And so Major Henry and I had a lot of fun with that. He was my commander at the time, and then I followed him to Alaska, and I was his chief in Alaska. So I think there's a picture out there too with my Q-tip hands, and so that was a funny story. That one stuck.
I can see why.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like a Three Stooges routine.
A lot of fun, but you gotta have laughter. You gotta have fun at what you're doing, or it just doesn't work.
Well, that brings us to kind of some maybe closing thoughts, and I always like to get a kind of a biggest tip or advice you would want to offer those that are watching, especially those that may be earlier in their career, and you had some just fantastic advice for dealing with something that a lot of people may be dealing with and afraid to speak up about. So what would be kind of your biggest tip, biggest advice for somebody going through their military career?
Well, I think, like I said, in some of the stories that I've told, I really kind of had, some main themes. And I think those are, first of all, our job is to make a difference through music. It's not just to play music, but it's to make a difference through the tool of music. And that's what we do. And, so that's the job. That's what we do. And secondly, you do what you have to do, whatever the job entails. And there's always going to be obstacles. There's always going to be, oh my gosh, how are we going to do this? Well, you do. You just make it happen. You find a way. You make it happen. It may not be exactly what you thought. You may have to redirect. You may have to change some things, but you find a way to make it happen. And thirdly, as you progress, regardless of what rank you are, you're always going to have somebody over you. You're always going to have somebody underneath you. So as you progress in rank, you train those that are coming up behind you to take your job. As a chief, I felt it was my job to train my senior NCOs to know what to do, to know all of the ins and outs of how to make these changes, how to make these decisions. And so I would try to be hands off with that and let them do it, because they needed to learn through the experience of it. And I think that's very important as leaders, that we train the next generation so that they are fully equipped to do their job when they come and fill our shoes. And then on the other aspect of it, reach out for help if you're struggling. Reach out for help. Keep an eye on each other. Not just keep an eye on each other, but don't be afraid to take the step to ask somebody, if they're okay. That may be the turning point for them. that they need. And if you are struggling, remember that there's always hope. There's always an answer. Suicide is not the answer. There is always an answer. There's always a way. There's always a solution to whatever you may be facing. And you are not alone. You're not alone in this.
Well, thank you for all of this, for sharing your time and being willing to open up, not just in this interview, but in your book and in the way you continue to speak with other people about. I know you mentioned that you, I think still currently, but in the past have gone around and given lectures and seminars to be able to spread the word in such a positive way. And it makes all the difference to know that other people have gone through this, are going through it, and that there are so many other options. There's, like you said, there's always an answer other than self-harm. And it's such a wonderful thing to be able to have such, such an advocate for that. So thank you for everything you're doing, everything you continue to do, everything you've done. And I know personally, I've really enjoyed this interview and have found so much value in it. And I know our audience will as well.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you having me. It's been an honor to share my story, and always here if anybody needs anything. So thank you so much for having me.